Good morning and welcome to Energy News Biz webinar series. I'm your host, Arnes Biogradlia, coming to you live with more green energy takes than an over-caffeinated electrolyzer. Now, if you ever stared at a map of Australia and thought, you know what this place needs? A 36 megawatt solar powered hydrogen and ammonia plant that fuels tractors and decarbonizes cotton fields. Well, you're either a genius or Jack Rickers. Jack is a commercial and business development lead at Hiringa Energy Australia, and today he's here to tell us how a fully funded 115 million project in Moree is rewriting the rules of sustainable agriculture one molecule at a time. Before he joined the green ammonia revolution, Jack was the go-to guy at EY for unlocking grants and concessional finance, aka he's the guy who could find the money in a government couch cushion. Now, he's pioneering GEGHA, a project so ambitious it makes traditional fertilizer supply chains look like dial-up internet. Jack, it's awesome to have you here with us today. Welcome.
Hans, thank you very much. It's good to be with you and your guests. I think that's probably a very generous introduction. I certainly don't think I can take credit as being the mastermind or the pioneer of it, but look, it's great to be part of such an innovative and motivated team to get this done.
Thank you, Jack. Before Jack shows us how to turn sunlight into ammonia, without blowing up anything, of course, let's set the stage. This isn't just your typical green hydrogen someday story. We're talking 4,500 tons of green ammonia every year, solar to hydrogen to ammonia in one vertically integrated system. Cotton fields that grow traceable, export-ready, low-carbon crops, and a fuel supply so local, even the tractors could walk to the plant if they had legs, of course. So, if you thought fertilizer and climate tech were mutually exclusive, strap in. And don't forget, please drop your questions in the chat below. Shoot them via DMs. I'll make sure that Jack tackles them right after his presentation. Jack, the stage is yours.
Thanks very much, Arn. So, yeah, look, great to meet everyone and be with you. As Arn's introduced, my name's Jack. I'm the commercial and business development lead at Hiringa. My role within our organisation is to effectively spearhead the growth of our Australian operations. Look, really the purpose of today is to give you a bit of an overview and peel back the covers on our Good Earth Green Hydrogen and Ammonia project, or GEGHA as we like to call it. Reached a really exciting milestone of financial close very recently, and look, we're due to start construction later this year. Once built, GEGHA will be one of Australia's first commercial scale green hydrogen projects, which is fantastic, I think, for industry overall. But before I got into it, I just wanted to set the scene a little bit. So our journey started almost 3 years ago. It's been a really long time in the making. And while it's exciting to get to this point, there have been quite a lot of ups and downs as well. So when we started, I'm sure many of the audience remember, we were in that kind of hydrogen hype phase where, you know, the industry was touted at pretty much solving the world's decarbonisation challenges. Along that way, we've seen so many exciting, promising projects fall away, which has been really disappointing. But I guess what my hope a lot of people take from this today is that right size, right time projects are absolutely viable in the hydrogen and hydrogen derivative space. And that hydrogen derivatives like ammonia will play and hopefully can play a really critical role decarbonising some of our hardest to abate sectors like agriculture and heavy transport and industrial manufacturing. I think what this project shows, though, is to get that done, we might need to be prepared to think about things a little bit differently. So in terms of the key points, I think where our project might vary a little, and it's not to say that others in the industry aren't doing this, but it certainly goes against the grain of the status quo in a way. And that's first forming truly genuine partnerships with purpose-driven organizations. And the second is to reverse engineer the value chain. So really for this project, we started with the customer and we worked backwards and really we're solving around that final end case and that need. So hopefully those things will make sense shortly, but because that organizational collaborative approach is really something which underpins the success of this project to date, I wanted to start with a brief introduction of both organizations. So Look, apologies, these videos are a little bit marketing based, but they do kind of get across. So as I said, this is Hiringa. We are a vertically integrated developer, owner, operator, specialising in green hydrogen infrastructure projects. We're actually headquartered out of New Plymouth in the Taranaki region of New Zealand. And we've got Australian staff and operations as well. So myself is based in Sydney. We've got a headcount of about 5 here. We've got people in Sydney, Tasmania, Brisbane, and then over in Perth as well. Our organisational focus is really on that full value chain decarbonisation, looking at those hard to abate industry supply chains. So we're starting our investment with a domestic decarbonisation focus, particularly in agriculture and heavy transport. We invest where we think it makes sense. So just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? So what does that mean to us? Probably two things. One is we need to be competitive. So is hydrogen going to be competitive against the incumbent fossil fuel-based fuel or feedstock, which is looking to displace, or the alternative decarbonisation pathways, which might be available in that particular application? And the second is there scale in the market? What that means for us in terms of translating that into our priority areas for investment are two. So there's heavy transport. So in both Australia and New Zealand, we are focused on developing an integrated network of hydrogen refueling stations. Over in New Zealand, we've actually been an operator since April last year. We've got 3 stations which have been built as part of our phase 1 network and 1 which is currently under construction. When that's complete and joins the rest of the operating stations, we'll effectively be solving for what's called the Golden Triangle. So I don't have a map up in front of me, but if you know the geography of New Zealand's North Island, you've got Auckland at the very top, you've got Taronga off to the west, you've got Palmerston North down a little bit further on the south side, and then you've got Te Rapa on the west side. So those top 3 stations are what's called the Golden Triangle, and it's where about 95% of New Zealand's North Island freight routes kind of travel through. And so what we're doing is we've installed 1 megawatt electrolysis at each of those stations. We've got online production, compression and dispensing, and we've got operating hydrogen fuel cell vehicles as well as dual fuel trucks on that network. Similar Australia, so as part of phase 1, we're looking at a similar approach, but at a larger scale, with 3 sites that are going to connect Sydney to Brisbane. Just haven't quite cracked Canva yet, so I need to just exit out of this and then go down, and I'll give you a bit of an overview of our joint venture partner Sundown as well. So I'll let this one play because there's a bit of talking in it.
It's very rewarding growing food and fibre. People ask me what I do, and I help feed and clothe the world. It feels pretty good. Our job is to leave this soil in just as good a shape as what we found it, and if not better, for the next generation. I can't see because
that's not a spider.
That's an insect caught inside a spider's web. Our introduction to Good Earth Cotton started as a dream of my wife. One Saturday morning, about 10, 15 years ago, we were in the paddocks and she had a desire to wear the cotton that was grown in that paddock. And I thought it was pollen. I thought she was dreaming.
This has been a great journey that started some time ago to enable your customers to know exactly where your garments came from, what hands they passed through, and the journey that they've taken.
The fibre trace particles, the rare earth mineral, that's been melted down into a slurry. It is then blended with the cotton at the ginning stage, and it's being able to pass right through to the garment.
So once this is now marked with fibre trace, it's there for life.
Fibre trace technology ensures that our fibre that leaves this shore, that comes back to this shore, is 100% Australian.
I think it's just fantastic that it's an Australian grown product and made product for a great Australian brand.
Great. So that was Sundown, and what you would have seen is their Good Earth cotton brand. Sundown are one of Australia's largest cotton producers. Their property at GEGHA, where our project's located, they produce it. It expands about 65,000 acres, and they do up to 80,000 bales of cotton per annum. They are a highly credible brand with reputation for really innovation and sustainable farming practices, known in Australia and outside as well. Part of their differentiation is founded on that technology that you would have been seeing in there called FibreTrace. So they actually built FibreTrace, and what it does is add special dyes to the fibre itself. There's a physical reader that can be used on the other end of that supply chain when those fibres are turned into actual textile goods, so clothes, that can actually demonstrate that full supply chain traceability and accountability. So it verifies the origin and really the credentials of that brand. Let me just get out of this. All right, should be able to stop playing around this PowerPoint now the videos are done. So I mentioned earlier points for differentiation, and this is something that I think we're quite proud in how we approach our projects, and we approach the sort of market activation and development side of things. So I mentioned earlier around that hydrogen hype era, right? I think the challenge with the way that the industry first had a crack at hydrogen development is that it sort of applied this build it big and they will come mentality. So, benefiting from economies of scale. It assumed that there was this liquid market which was ready to pay for a premium for the products, for the low carbon products that we were developing. I think that's been really challenging, and a shortfall. A lot of the projects which have been developed is that market hasn't actually been there, so the business case hasn't been there to justify the infrastructure investment. So Hiringa's approach to development is to flip that value chain, right? A bit of context, and in the specific, with the specific lens of agriculture and fibre. As an example, after harvesting, the raw cotton gets dried in what's called a cotton gin and refined further, like the one at GEGHA, which is on the same property where our project will be located and where Sundown grows their cotton. That raw cotton then gets exported, usually to a retailer. The retailer passes it on to textile companies who then make the clothes. So for Sundown, in this value chain, the consumer is the purchaser of the clothes, right? And consumers of luxury clothing are actually willing to pay quite a high premium for those products and the price point, but they also expect a premium product as a result. And there's a really growing expectation from consumers around the sustainability credentials as part of that. Sundown forecasted this quite a while ago, well before they met us. And what they've adopted since is this really quantified approach to abatement on farm. That approach has been extremely valued by the market and manufacturers due to their ability to also be underpinned by that FibreTrace technology and have that blockchain verification of all of that quantified data being passed through that supply chain and being able to be utilized as part of different reporting requirements for stakeholders across it. So as a result, Sundown can now bypass the retailer, which is the usual BAU for a stakeholder like them, and have been able to capitalize on a premium brand reputation, and that obviously has flown on to pricing as well. So the GEGHA project really is enabled by that work that Sundown has done to activate their own market, because it means that pricing for that feedstock, although the project is aiming to be quite competitive with existing fossil fuel alternatives, means that can actually be justified and shared across that value chain. And that's effectively what's underpinning development and a big part of why this project's been successful in the timeline that it has. So look, this is an extract from the Good Earth Cotton website. If you jump on their website, I won't spend too much time here, but you can kind of get a feel for the journey that they've been on and some of the things that they've been able to do to decarbonise their farming operations. So that extends from things like carbon sequestration, organically composted waste, efficient water use. So in irrigated cotton farming, water use is really critical, and obviously something which comes under scrutiny at times. Biodiversity preservation, zero to minimum tillage practices, crop rotation, and they've also got existing renewable energy use, which I'll touch on in a second. These are some of the brands that Sundown have been able to work with directly as a result. If you go, I'm not sure exactly what it's like for the European audience, but if you go into an Australian supermarket, so David Jones or a Myer, you can have a look at a lot of the brands that they stock, and they'll actually have the Good Earth cotton label on them, which is quite awesome to see, actually. So a few highlights for the project. It's fully funded. We've been really fortunate that we've actually been able to access a $36 million grant from the New South Wales state government under the Hydrogen Hubs initiative. It's also got debt finance from the National Australia Bank, and there's a minor equity contribution from the JV partners as well. Really, one of the purposes of this project, yes, it is to produce low carbon products like hydrogen and ammonia, which have varying uses, but it's also around input supply security. So it's really around transforming what the fertilizer supply chain looks like on the east coast of Australia. At the moment, farmers for their nitrogen or nitrogenous based fertilizers have varying product options in there, which have varying percentages of nitrogen. But really, there's two main uses. I guess if you were to look at it as a directly displaceable product, one is urea, and there's about 2 million tons of urea used on Australia's east coast each year. Really, all of that's imported from places like China and the Middle East. And so, there's emissions associated with the marine transport as part of that, and then it needs to travel about 500 kilometers inland to get to the Moree area, which is where Qatar is closely located to. And then the other example is ammonia, anhydrous ammonia, which is a directly substitutable product. The only place that anhydrous ammonia is manufactured on Australia's east coast is at Hiringa Island. That's made by Orica at the moment, and the other use that Orica have for that is as a feedstock into their ammonium nitrate production, which is a feedstock into the resource sector. And so you still face that challenge of inland transport quite a way. The other challenge with the existing supply chain is because the feedstocks for those products are still fossil fuels, you experience the volatility in the prices for that. So an example is in 2022, the price of urea was up around $2,500 a ton, I believe. And so, that was as a result of natural gas not being available at that time due to geopolitical conflict, and obviously that flowed right through to the farmers, and they had a really hard time being able to afford their operations for that year. The other purpose of this project is it's a commercial pilot, right? So it's around market activation. Sundown is a JV partner to the project, so they are a significant off-taker for the fertilizer which is being produced, but deliberately by design, there's also offtake being made available to other growers in that wider valley, so they can build trust in the low carbon product commodity. It's exactly the same chemical composition as what they've been using and what the alternative grey ammonia product looks like in the market, but there still might be some misconceptions. So one purpose is to build trust, and then really the aim is also to be a successful use case and show a pathway of how those growers can then capitalize on using low carbon fuels and feedstocks and pass that through their supply chain like Sundown's done as well. Another feature of this project is that its purpose is not only to produce anhydrous ammonia as a fertilizer. That's certainly the core part of it and a fundamental component, but we'll also be using hydrogen. We'll also be producing hydrogen not only as a feedstock, but for direct use on farm. And so there's a few things we're doing there. One, we're working with Sundown, who are adopting it to displace diesel in their irrigation pumping process. And the second is Hiringa themselves are going to use it for a separate project, which is in its planning phase, which is a delivered model refueling network based in Moree. And what that'll allow us to do is allow us to decarbonise that whole fibre and other agricultural commodity product supply chain. And so you've got decarbonisation of your feedstocks on farm for that fertiliser, which obviously flows on to the embedded carbon intensity of the cotton bale itself. then that cotton bale, rather than having to get put on a diesel truck and go 500 kilometers to a port, we're going to be able to support the ability for those trucks either through hydrogen fuel cells or more than likely for that A double combination, it'll be a dual fuel model, but it'll offer decarbonisation to that transport part of that supply chain as well. Look, the project is predominantly behind the meter power generation by design. That provides us with the ability to have really affordable levelized cost of electricity and protects us against market fluctuations. It also resolves delay in the build out of transmission infrastructure in regional areas, which is quite challenging. And I won't touch on it too much right now because I'll do it in a bit more detail later, but it provides us a lot of flexibility to actually, there is a minor grid tether, so we can both import and export from that project as well. And electricity itself can be another product that we're trading as part of the project. As I mentioned, GEGHA is a commercial scale pilot. Its strategic purpose is to demonstrate the viability of what we call a hub and spoke production model for regional green fertiliser production. For the reasons I mentioned before, the fertiliser supply chain is obviously very much based on large export scale infrastructure, which is located a very, very long way away from end use. And so the other side of it is to catalyse market demand for large scale projects planned by Hiringa. So this is the first stage in demonstrating the viability of that hub and spoke style model. And then moving forward, we're going to be planning larger scale projects, which will be able to provide a lot more of the supply in these regions, I guess. The projects themselves are located in what we call, again, nitrogen sinks, and it's effectively these hubs where there's a really high demand for that nitrogen fertilizer product. The project is, as you can see on screen from the flow diagram, what you'd refer to as a power to X project. So it's got behind the meter power generation, which includes 36 megawatts of solar, 41 megawatt hour battery and energy storage system, and a 4.95 MVA low capacity grid tether as well. What this allows us to do is a few things, right? So we can, if I can get my mouse back on the screen, we can effectively produce solar here, which can either supply the electrolysis directly or we can store it in the battery. We can as well import, if electricity is really cheap, straight into the battery or to use it for electrolysis. But we can also produce solar, store it in the battery, and then when prices are really high in the national electricity market, export it back out to the grid. We also have an agreement in place where we can supply behind the meter or behind the market facing meter to the gin as well. After that, we've got 15 megawatts of electrolysis. It's 3 5 megawatt alkaline based systems. That can either be used to refuel our hydrogen vehicles as part of our planned mobility network in the Moree region. Should just be a direct link here as well, or it can be used directly on farm. And I've got a slide touching on it later, but we're actually working with a few technology providers who are looking to retrofit existing diesel irrigation pumps so they can accept both diesel and hydrogen as a fuel source through an ICE engine. And Sundown are doing some really amazing work working with some research consortiums and universities around static on-farm machinery to use fuel cells. The majority, though, of the hydrogen is used as a feedstock into the ammonia plant. We'll be able to produce up to 4,500 tonnes per annum. That's our target utilisation rate based on a lot of energy flow modelling. We don't want to run it to its full capacity because it doesn't necessarily make sense to do that. I think it has a nameplate capacity of up to about 6,000 tonnes per annum, though. Really important part of this project is the storage of the ammonia itself. So fertilizer demand is obviously highly seasonal, which is one of the challenges in the existing supply chain anyway. And so perhaps you could argue it looks like an overbuild of storage is really to help us deal with that seasonality requirement. So we're actually looking at 6 100-ton bullets to provide us that flexibility, and then smaller storage vessels to help us get that around to the different farms and have alternate storage strategies around that region as well. All right. So this is what the project looks like. This is actually a picture. It's what the site looks like, and then we've just rendered onto the front here the new build of 27 megawatts of solar and the plant, and obviously the evaporation pond. But this is exactly what the gin looks like now. So the gin itself is a JV between Sundown Pastoral and another company called LDC. And they've got an existing 9 megawatt solar array here. So this is built, it's been transferred into the project, but this has been traditionally providing the gin with renewable electricity and exporting into the local network as well. So you can see around here all the different cotton fields that Sundown will grow their cotton on. They'll basically be rolled up and taken by a tractor, dried and processed as part of the gin. Trucks will use this road. So this is towards the coast here. They'll come in along here. They'll come and pick the cotton bales up, and then they'll come back out through this road. In terms of water access for the project, it's obviously a major question that is asked. Our water source will be an existing dam. The dam's off screen here. The project's water requirement, I think, has a maximum of 51 megalitres. This dam has is roughly a 200 megaliter capacity. In the event that there is no rain or we're in a drought period, there are a few alternate water sources, but the next step will be to use an existing bore and water access license throughout. Obviously, what the plant will look like, there'll be a load out facility built here, built up through here as well. Sorry, I just had a bit of... Ooh, skipped ahead a little bit. There we go. So the impact of the project, I think you could break it down into two key, headings. So individual grower impact. I think what's important to know about the Australian context is here agriculture is not subject to any kind of carbon tax. And so viability of projects like these really needs to be embedded in upside to the grower. Fortunately, Australia, I think, has a really great reputation as an exporter of food and fibre products. And so our farmers are really capitalised to take really positioned to capitalise on growing consumer preference for low carbon products. To truly value that sustainability impact, though, I think what we need is a quantified approach to abatement, which is traceable and verifiable in the way that Sundown have done that. Otherwise, I think there's this increased risk of greenwashing around these marketing slogans which are not really based in fact. And that starts all the way back at feedstock production and input, right? So GEGHA will be one of the first projects in Australia to participate in a new developed scheme called the Australian Guarantee of Origin. It effectively produces certificates, and those certificates are effectively life cycle analysis of the project using a well-to-gate emissions accounting methodology. Initially, it's just starting with hydrogen. The immediate plan for the government is to extend that scheme to ammonia as well, though. What happens is as a key input, Sundown will use that LCA or those certificates as inputs into its own GHG reporting for its cotton bales. And then that's something that it's already well established. And then it will provide that report as part of the verification of the cotton itself, passing that through the supply chain. So that's auditable and can be passed all the way on to the kind of the textile products themselves or the fashion outlets who are ultimately accountable for their own consumers. On the right, likewise, that same work's going to carry over to emission reporting in Australia. We have climate-related financial disclosure, which is kicking off very shortly. A lot of our major agricultural operations are owned by super funds, and super funds are one of the priority groups who need to actually start reporting quite quickly. So there's quite a lot of interest from those sort of stakeholders in this project and similar ones as well. The second one is supply chain impact. So previously I mentioned fertilizer market certainly has its own volatility. Currently, the way that the market contracts is months ahead of time, and it's subject to spot pricing, whatever that will be. And so for farmers, GEGHA provides the ability to have that control and oversight over what those key input costs are going to be, because we have control and oversight over the key input costs for our own feedstocks in hydrogen and ammonia production. And for us, that's electricity. So obviously we get that security because we've got our behind the meter generation, and then water. And that's something that's quite a known commodity to the project as well. As a result of that, we're actually able to offer fixed medium-term contracts, which is quite different and obviously something that we're testing out with the market as we implement this project and something to get used to again. But the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, just because that allows farmers to actually plan multiple years in ahead, and how they're going to actually source all of their other inputs and resources that they need as well. So on timing, we very excitedly reached financial close last month. Construction is set to commence around October. We'll be starting with the solar scope first. Hiringa is actually the principal contractor. So we'll manage the detailed design phase and that being finalised out, and then obviously all the vendor contracts as well. The hydrogen ammonia plant will start getting constructed in early 2026. We'll complete building in late 2026, and then aim to be operational around January, February in 2027. So I think that's gonna come up quite quickly. Expansion project. So look, GEGHA is a commercial pilot. Hiringa are actually progressing feasibility for 2 larger expansion projects, which has always been our roadmap. So the scale of GEGHA is for about 4,500 tonnes of fertiliser per annum. The expansion will be about 20,000 tonnes per annum. So rather than a 16 tonne per day ammonia plant, it'll be a 60 tonne per day ammonia plant, probably between 50 and 60 megawatts of electrolysis, and 100 plus megawatts of solar, or solar and wind potentially is something we're evaluating as well. Again, the purpose of our expansion strategy is to further develop and transform that fertiliser supply chain. You can see on this heat map how we've kind of selected these sites and why we have as well. So it's really about that proximity to, one is coastal ammonia production that you can see just above Sydney, near Newcastle, based at that export terminal. And then the other import terminal is up in Brisbane, and then also proximity to where demand is. So those light blue dots are key cotton farms, as well as other farms which would preference utilisation of anhydrous ammonia as their nitrogen source. So I guess what else to add to this is, look, there's a broad benefit of these expansion projects to regional industries. Obviously, supply security is a major one that I've touched on. Price stability is another one. So our pricing, obviously, it's not something that I can disclose. There is product available if people are interested, but pricing is based on being competitive with fossil fuel alternatives, really. And we know that that's fundamental for a project like this to be successful, that the premium can't be unreasonable. I think when we move to these larger scale projects, and something that we're figuring out during the feasibility and then the feed stage will be scale. Scale will definitely be challenging. We've been really lucky to have partnered with an organisation who has helped us unlock their own market. It's a really close community up in the Guada. Cotton farmers all talk to each other. And so the next stage of the project will probably be down in the Riverina. So we'll look at another larger scale project in the Guada again, and then another project in the Riverina. Probably the Riverina is our next location that we're looking at. There's quite a lot. It's actually located in what's called a renewable energy zone in Australia, which is a coordinated strategic effort by government to support the build out of large scale VRE, wind and solar. And so we're finding that there's opportunities in the market now to work with existing projects, or because there's going to be lower consenting risk and faster connectivity to require transmission infrastructure for that large scale wind and solar, which needs to support the new projects. But we will, so diversification, we will still have to look at, I think, other uses. Obviously, I said the market activation that we're working with the GEGHA project is, there's a lot of working with universities and looking at different technology options for the hydrogen on farm and things like that. And then another thing that we're keen to do for this next project is look at alternate uses for ammonia, which is another technology option, which is catching up pretty quickly as well. So a question we get pretty often actually is, what are the barriers to adoption of these products? And I think it's a common misconception that actually anhydrous ammonia has been used in agriculture on Australia's east coast and in other international geographies for a really long time. The way it actually, you do need specialized equipment, and a lot of farmers are still using ammonia now. And so they still have this, but effectively what you can see on screen is a really popular delivery mechanism. So a farm will effectively drive their tractor. That's a 7-ton, I think, nurse tank on the back filled with ammonia, and effectively it will send that ammonia to the tractor, and that ammonia as a gas gets squirted directly into the soil. So this is probably the last slide that I will cover, but decarbonising farm operations. So as I said, fuel and fertiliser collectively make up the majority of the emissions profile for non-livestock farmers. So if you include enteric fermentation or gas from cows, it's a significant proportion of agriculture's emissions, and agriculture is one of our highest emitting sectors in Australia. The utility of hydrogen is it can be used as a chemical feedstock and as an energy carrier. Sundown use, I think it's over 1 million litres of diesel per annum. And so this project is actually looking to trial in Q4, so probably in October, November this year. We're actually working with a few technology partners and Sundown's operational team to trial conversion of a couple of their 350 horsepower pumps. So what that'll mean is the inlet valve will be modified to accept both hydrogen and diesel as a fuel source, and it'll effectively blend those two based on performance requirements. So based on the results of that trial, Sundown are likely to, support a lot higher volumes of uptake of hydrogen direct use on farm. So the dual fuel technology is a great one. As I said, it probably is starting at that 40-50% blend rate, but we've identified a pathway to potentially achieve up to 100% blend as well. So the other things that Sundown are also working, and we're supporting with that with different original equipment manufacturers to evaluate on-farm hydrogen, mobile hydrogen fuel cell vehicle technologies, so new tractors and things like that, and just broadly working with a lot of agri-CRCs. And then Hiringa is working on building a delivered hydrogen refueling station in Moree itself. So Keetar is about 40 kilometres south of Moree, which is the nearest kind of town. And that will effectively, once built out, accept hydrogen from the project and support those really, support that full value chain decarbonisation from paddock all the way to port. And then obviously if it's staying domestically, that too. So look, that's pretty much what I wanted to cover.
Back to you, Jack. Thank you so much for the presentation. And all right, folks, that was like watching a Mad Max meet the climate accord. You've seen how ammonia can go from villain to hero. Now it's time to dig deep into your questions. Let's go with the first one. Jack, how does GEGHA's behind-the-meter model help stabilize ammonia pricing when fossil fuel market goes, full chaos mode?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think it's around the flexibility for our project to really optimize different revenue streams, right? So we obviously, it's funny. We actually started with a completely different scope for the project when we started 3 years ago, and it was actually the solar and the BESS were a lot smaller. And so over time, BESS costs have come down quite a bit. And what we've done is actually overbuild that to give us the flexibility that certainly we can cover that baseload power requirement for the electrolyser, which will allow us to produce sufficient volumes of feedstock to meet the demand for our ammonia contracts. which are fixed and that we need to honour. But it also means that we can actually sell back into the NEM and take advantage of kind of that peak pricing and undertake that energy arbitrage and kind of what I was talking about before in import and export as it makes sense for us. And then obviously the ability to produce large amounts of hydrogen means that we can sell that hydrogen directly and have different contract prices for that as the market develops. So that's really it. It's that control over the electricity and the water feedstocks, I think, into that process, which isn't subject to the same level of volatility that, say, natural gas or coal might be in those global supply chains.
Next one, a 35.8 million in grant funding. How do you design a project that earns that kind of a government confidence? What were the keys?
Yeah, again, good question. Not easily is the answer. And look, I think, anyone that's kind of been through a financing deal with a bank, it's very much the same as that, right? Like when government are awarding significant quantities of money like that, they actually face the additional scrutiny of public pressure. I would actually like to call out New South Wales government and just say that they've been absolutely fantastic supporters and partners with our project. The regional New South Wales team are helping Hiringa build out a lot of their other projects as well, but they've really been an enabler and a facilitator and helped us coordinate and navigate the regulatory and the policy landscape in this place. So, they're actually a part of our project in a lot of ways. And so, don't get me wrong, there's a very big contract that we need to honour with New South Wales government. And to get to that point, we really had to provide the rigour around, developing detailed business cases, financial models, governance frameworks, funding plans, detailing the contingency of, if it goes wrong, how we're going to back ourselves up and what's the alternative plan to make sure that, if New South Wales aren't going to get criticised, because this is an industry that I think does attract a lot of criticism. So they've been great in that regard, and they've, it's not like a set and forget. We've been working with them probably over the last 18 months, probably more, as part of that, and it's been an iterative process to get to that point. Certainly a lot of checks and balances, but as it should be with that level of understanding.
Wow. So, can you walk us through the tech stack behind the hydrogen side? How did you size the electrolyzer, the battery, the solar, and any room for future expansion?
Yeah, it's probably a difficult one, and I probably won't do it justice. Has been probably one of the only engineers not being one of the only non-engineers in the business. Effectively, as part of the modelling for the project, we undertook pretty complex-based Python modelling for the energy flow optimization, and we analysed a multiple of scenarios around, looking at that access to power, around how we actually size the solar and the battery itself. Looked at the option for potentially augmenting and upgrading that grid network and the impact that would have on cost and timing to the project. Looked at the how we needed to size our hydrogen and ammonia production assets to actually produce meaningful volumes of product into the market and also meet the need of our JV partner Sundown. And then basically looked at the financial implication of how that sizing was impacted by all of those factors. I think, there was probably countless iterations of that, and it was a kind of a narrowing down over time of what the best option was, and supported in implementation by available technologies.
Next one. You mentioned direct injection of ammonia as a fertilizer. What are the environmental and logistical advantages over conventional urea?
Yeah, so again, there's a little bit of work. I mean, obviously, anhydrous ammonia as a gas is more difficult to handle, and it's probably one of the reasons, other than supply chain security and stability, why they did move to urea, because it's in that granular form, right? And so you can transport and storage is a lot easier. And so one of the challenges with ammonia is how do you how do you store it, how do you get it to where it needs to be, and then ensuring that people have the right equipment to actually effectively deliver that. As I said, the supply chain has solved for that in the past and has established itself to support anhydrous ammonia. Once you do get to that point, though, there's been quite a lot of work done by a few Victorian research institutions, which actually show that the nitrogen use efficiency can be improved. So one of the key components around nitrogen fertiliser is that even if you reduce the emissions intensity of the nitrogen product, there's still emissions associated with the use of that. And so what you want to do is shrink your whole pie of the emissions. So you want to improve your nitrogen use efficiency and reduce the amount of fertiliser that you need to use to get the growth outcomes that you get for your crops. And then you need, for what's left, so still using the products that you need, you want to reduce the emissions intensity of that in itself. So it supports that whole pie shrinking, switching to anhydrous ammonia in a way. And then what we're doing is really focusing on, well, for the nitrogen fertiliser that we do need to use, because it is vital for our industries, how do we get that last mile?
And you're producing hydrogen not just for fertilizer, but also for on-road and on-farm refueling. How close are we to actual green-powered trucks and tractors?
Oh, we're not close. We're already there. So we've been operating our HRNZ, or Hydrogen Refueling New Zealand, the first phase of that network, for 15 or 16 months now, since April last year. And we've got operating vehicles on that network every day. So we've got hydrogen fuel cells, which are operating on that network. So Hyundai and their Exient model is one of the examples of that. And then we've also got dual fuel trucks. So there's a company called Pure Change Technologies, which is a subsidiary of HWI Richardson, and they work on the conversion of existing ICE vehicles so that they can accept hydrogen and use it through an existing internal combustion engine. And what that actually allows, it's actually a great step change technology in that you need the demand and the vehicle availability to actually underwrite the development of the refueling infrastructure itself. And so while the dual fuel technology isn't necessarily as efficient in terms of energy of running it through a fuel cell, it doesn't have that expensive capex of a new fuel cell purchase attached to it. And so in Australia, I think the life of the truck is 15 years or something like that. The majority of our trucking fleet over here is actually made up by mums and dads owners that only own 2 or 3 trucks within their fleet. And so they're not necessarily in a position as some of the larger carriers to quickly make that switch and buy new vehicles and take that initial early risk. And so for them, that's a great opportunity to actually affect meaningful decarbonisation of our heavy transport sector, utilising existing vehicles, supports the refueling infrastructure to get away and builds the confidence for people to then go out and make that larger step change down the track.
And finally, what kind of carbon credit mechanisms are in play here, and how do they fit into the long-term revenue model?
Yeah, carbon credits are definitely important. We've actually, Australia's main recognised carbon crediting scheme is ACCUs, or Australian Carbon Credit Units. It's recently switched to a component-based methodology where you can actually approach the Clean Energy Regulator and have a market-led development of a methodology in which a project needs to be registered under. But at the moment, there's no existing methods which were available to us through that. And so we're working with an organisation called FarmN, who have supported us by developing a methodology with a reputable international carbon market registry, which is specific to the manufacturing scope of fertiliser production. So you can reach out to them. I think they made a post about the project as well, so it's certainly on LinkedIn. What I would say outside of that as well, though, is not only carbon credits, but New South Wales is a really attractive jurisdiction in Australia to invest in hydrogen projects. And Australia is a fantastic jurisdiction outside of that as well. So in addition to carbon credits, we're actually supported by a number of policy mechanisms. At the federal level, Australia has now legislated what's called the Hydrogen Production Tax Incentive, and that provides $2 per kilo $2 per kilo against generation effectively operating as a refundable tax offset. So you get it as cash if you're loss making, and if you're profit making, it's a tax offset. That's $2 a kilo. That can get stacked under a few New South Wales incentives. One's called the Renewable Fuel Scheme that we've been working really closely with the New South Wales government on, and they've been, fantastic supporters in listening to what our project needs are and understanding how they can actually develop these policies and incentives to support these projects get away. The way that works is effectively it sets up a liability mechanism for specific stakeholders, specific fossil fuel stakeholders, and they effectively get set with a liability target of a certain amount of renewable fuel certificates that they need to buy, which is proportionate to their share of that fossil fuel product sale into the market. And the hydrogen producer is the one which generates those certificates and needs to sell those certificates to those liable entities. And then the third one is something called a green hydrogen electricity concession. So New South Wales, for a period of 12 years, is basically providing a discount of 90% of the line charges for electricity which is imported and specifically used for an eligible hydrogen production load. So, while we are predominantly behind the meter based, it actually really supports the cost of importing electricity as well when we do choose to use that on the hydrogen load, because we don't pay pretty much any of the lines charge associated with that. So there's a raft of suites incentives which have been bundled together and been really instrumental in this project.
Thank you, Jack, for today's presentation and these insights into the real-world hydrogen project.
Very welcome, Arns. Thanks for having me.
To our audience, thank you for being part of this. You just witnessed a glimpse of what a climate-positive agriculture sector actually looks like. Not a PowerPoint fantasy, real steel in the ground, real solar in the sky, and ammonia in the tank. I'm Adnes Biogradlia. This is Energy News Biz. And if you learned something today, tell your friends. If you haven't, it's on you. Stay curious, stay charged, and we'll see you in the next webinar. Bye.